understanding that mankind came to after 2 world wars, after that great tragedy of the 20th century, and they are trying to preserve control over trade, over economic transactions and settlements, and they continue to make attempts to control the situation everywhere in their former colonies, even though these countries have been independent for some time, for a while now. And despite their monopoly in international finance, and this monopoly is part of the neocolonial course that they pursue: sanctions, blocking of transactions, so-called freezing of assets, or basically seizing the assets and private property. So they use it as a tool of pressure to exert this pressure on the countries and regimes they don't like, and it's a mean of uncompetitive, unfair competition. And under these conditions, the current global system, its institutions, non-discriminatory means, consideration for mutual interests, and equal access to the existing financial capabilities and instruments. So it's all happening in violation of this. And that begs a question. When you speak about Russia, you keep speaking about equal opportunities, but there are no equal states. Some states are larger, some states are not. They do not have as much clout in terms of resources. There are younger states that are just forming. So what equality can you understand by this? And I can answer this. There is equality in face of the law, in face of justice. Just like in society, we're all different, so we all have different starting positions. We all have different conditions in which we exist, but we're all equal in face of the law. And the second thing, they do not take into consideration the contribution of the states into the common good, and the thing that we call consistent development and progress. So somehow it means that this kind of labor should be subdued by the boorish attitude of the others. So this ultimatums, this blackmail should not be used as a tool, and we pay special attention to the reforms at the World Bank and International Monetary Fund. They need to support the financial stability and help with the development, but not become a tool of blackmail and this alleged domination. There is a high time that we carried out the modernization of the quotas that should reflect the role and the voice of the developing countries. These are not some artificial role of the developing countries that we are just making up. This is not just a voice that the developing countries have a right to raise. No, this is their contribution, but for whatever reason, it is not being taken into consideration, and sometimes it's being discriminated against. They are providing resources, natural resources, labor resources, and they also provide political support of the non-destructive ideologies. And unfortunately, in the 21st century, we tend to forget about such things as friendship, peaceful coexistence, mutual support, mutual respect, preservation of the historic memory. These things are what the developing countries are supporting with the political means. So they do not support the changes of the regime, assassinations, any kind of violations, so to accomplish their goals, but somehow their contribution is being discriminated against no matter what. That's why the role and the voice of the developing countries when making key decisions on the global level, it must not be merely taken into consideration just because one should do that, but because they make a real contribution to the development of the mankind. And we need to go away from politicization of international financial structures and discrimination against shareholders who do not share the approach by the aggressive minority in the West. IMF, World Bank, they go against their own norms. They continue to pump money into the Kiev regime in particular, despite the fact that everyone understands that this regime is not able to return any of these loans. I'm not speaking about their terrorist actions, about their criminal nature, but even from the financial standpoint, that were the main item on the agenda of these financial institutions. They spend this money into nothing. They will never return this money. And they will never get return on this investment. Look, since 2022, Ukraine received and were promised to receive a funding of $23.7 billion. How is that possible? Why? Who is making these decisions? Based on what? Why are these decisions that supposed to be made collectively, they are damaging the very collective that is supposed to make these decisions? They are harming this collective. You know what part of the country's quota at the IMF? 877% of the country's quota it amounts to. How is that possible? How can we speak about the economy when we see this? As for the World Bank, Ukraine was earmarked more than $70 billion, which is more than the amounts of the annual support for all the countries of sub-Saharan Africa taken together. And we understand if this money was earmarked for the developing countries, for example, African countries, then this money would yield tangible results. They would not be used to support nationalist massacres, racial discrimination. They would be used to develop countries. More than that, in 2025, Kiev set a record on receiving international financial support in history of the financial support. And the vast majority of this money is used for the military expenses of the military junta in Kiev. And they use an excuse of economic support when they are providing this help.
Look what is happening in states that really need that money, for whom that money would have become the water, the resource for development. And needing countries get orders of magnitude less credits at slavery, on slavery terms. They are forced to take loans 3 or 4 times at interest rates 3 or 4 times higher than those for Western countries. They are forced to spend huge amounts of money, not to overcome their difficulties, but just to pay off interest on their debts. We have figures going as high as half of a country's budget or even higher. Many countries of the global south and east are forced to spend money to buy energy, fertilizers, and so on, to the detriment of their long-term development plans. And now I'd like to switch to the topic that is only gaining momentum now, but I think it's much more dangerous and it poses threats and risks much higher than those that I spoke about in the first part of my speech. That's the digital neocolonization and the range of practices used by the collective West in their pursuit of this neocolonialist policy is growing wider and wider. Traditional methods of financial and economic dependence, just some of examples of which I gave you, amid digitalization technologies, introduction of AI technology, it becomes a very important factor in the competitive edge of states and an instrument of geopolitical influence. Differences in digital development of the collective South and the collective West. The Westerners use neocolonialist methods of enforcing their software and IT solutions. They're trying to push through the methods of regulating digitalization processes that essentially shape a new neocolonial dependence of developing countries in advanced technologies. On the one hand, the G20 and other international organizations of all formats, be it BRICS or the SCO, the Western formats, such as the G7 and the UN in general, they all speak that the future is with digitalization. They discuss digitalization of economy, of logistics, introduction of artificial intelligence. They speak about it and they decide on it as a non-alternative future. So it's already a fact. The beginning of digitalization that's only supposed to go wider and deeper. At the same time, they pay no attention. They turn a blind eye to the fact of redistribution of the resource base and what countries are ready for that, 100% ready for that, and what countries will never ever be able to get even close to the level of readiness, considering the amount of resources it's going to take. The US has been especially aggressive in this regard, literally enforcing their AI and software solutions, closed code solutions, and hampering other countries' trading potential through export control measures. Artificial intelligence technologies, if they go even slightly opposite to the interests of American IT giants, not even conflicting with American AI giants, but just diverting with them. We can talk about a new form of digital dependence, digital neocolonialism. In July 2025, Российская Gazeta prepared a publication by the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Russian Federation. It was translated in different languages. It was titled Neocolonialism in the Context of Artificial Intelligence. This article singled out the main forms of neuroexpansion, of the West's neuroexpansion. Now, it's not just a fact, but we have to talk about methods of countering this expansion. The old methods of golden billion are being presented in new packaging. And now IT giants now claim to be the decisive factors, the decisive actors in the redistribution of the world. And now it's interesting to talk about democracy. We're always told by the West that the Western countries are at the forefront of democracy, as they call themselves, because their systems are based on democratic principles that call for division of powers, regular elections, and so on. If currently international world actors are becoming international West-centric corporations, such as IT giants, now it's not the Western states that dictate their will to those corporations, but vice versa. Those corporations dictate their will to the states. Where is democracy in that? Because the leadership of that corporations is not elected by voting. So there is no change of power. Moreover, power in these corporations is inherited. This is the crisis of democracy. This is the beginning of this emergent neocolonialism. We're being told that colonialism now is the thing of the past because democracy leaves no possibility for colonialism. But if the weight of political decisions is now being transferred from the states to corporations, there is no democracy, obviously, then. The current paradigm of dependence, a whole system of dependencies that is designed to tether neo-colonial colonies to metropolis that dominate in the sphere of digitalization and artificial intelligence. The first kind of dependence is resource dependence. The first motivation is now gaining new shapes. Rare earths and rare metals. And there's great competition for their limited supplies and resources. I already mentioned rare earths and metals, then energy, water. But all this is now required in much higher quantities than the 20th and 19th centuries called for. So now we're looking not at just redistribution or ideology of capturing resources because it's profitable, because it's lucrative. Now it is critical, it is essential now, considering the demand for those resources with regard to digitalization, using the needs of the global south and the east in bridging the digital gap. The West is going to share its technologies with developing countries on conditions of providing access to resources. What does this mean? The West is going to tell developing countries, we will give you our latest IT and AI developments that will allow you to save a lot. Maybe we'll give you them for free, maybe with some subscription fees. But in exchange for that, you will give us access to your natural resources. You can go check my words. It's not a matter of distant future. It's something that's happening right now. And you will see that IT technologies will be given to developing countries in exchange for natural resource contracts at rip-off terms. So IT products will make developing countries further dependent and further indebted to Western countries. I'd like to emphasize once again, nothing allows us to expect those deals to be mutually respectable or fair. Well, recipient countries will easily become target countries if they won't be able to guarantee supplies of rare earths and rare metals. Countries who will just think about the favorable conditions of those contracts will immediately turn into targets for regime changes, for color revolutions, destabilization of situations. Another range of dependencies will be connected with big data. For Western IT giants, the population of developing countries are not just consumers of their products, but also bearers of metadata that can be used to train their language models, AI models. In their expansion of sales markets, big tech companies get access to new resource, the so-called oil of the 21st century, the big data. States that cannot ensure their digital sovereignty will have this data managed externally, and the degree of influence of Western companies and the countries standing behind them and their policies will be defining. The danger of this scenario is recognized and realized not only in developing countries, but in countries that are allies to the US. Even inside the collective West, there is an understanding, there is a realization that they are becoming new targets for colonial enslavement. They're not as thrilled by the American cloud umbrella, which de facto means ceding control over the key parameters of social life and economic life, all matters related to cybersecurity, data privacy, and so on. And the third factor, let's take a look from a different angle at this neocolonial system that threatens world security. By the way, let me just briefly touch upon the fact that cognitive dependence must be considered among the factors, which is probably one of the most dangerous, all-encompassing forms of dependence that is currently being brought about by digitalization.
So, third block that I would like to suggest for your discussion, not only during the today's session, but in general, that characterize this approaching neocolonial, not a world order, but world order is something that we see as a multipolar thing, but as a threat to this multipolar world order. This is one of the examples of the lack of law, lack of justice, both on the international level and overall establishment of the quasi-tools that are going to replace actual laws and actual justice. So one of the examples is the so-called International Criminal Court. In the context of the modern neocolonial practices, it is one of the tools of carrying out or fulfilling its decisions, because it's not a universal organization. It is not functioning under the UN aegis. It's a quasi-organization that is based on the agreements between a limited number of states. And China, India, the United States, actually, they are not part of this agreement. Russia is also not part of this agreement. And the majority of the Asian and the Arab East countries are not part of this agreement. So if we look at the population of the Earth, the vast majority of the Earth population are not covered by the ICC jurisdiction, but they are trying to make decisions outside its jurisdictions all the time. It's a pseudo court. It's trying to enlarge its geography with the countries that were not even part of the Rome's statute, that was an establishing decree of ICC. So what is this organization, quasi-organization, doing? For many years, mostly, they care about the situation in Africa, Central African Republic, Uganda, Kenya, Libya, Ivory Coast, Mali, and all of those who were persecuted by this court. You would not believe that. Most of them are Africans. Most of the convicted people are Africans, and they don't tell this, but the crimes by the NATO countries in Iraq and Iran and Libya and Afghanistan and the Caribbean countries, somehow the ICC is not looking into these crimes. It has never made any rulings in regards of what happened there. So it makes one think that this ICC is pursuing a goal of stopping anyone from persecuting the global minority, the heads of the Western states. And they are trying to create this image of the fact that African state leaders are always to be accused of the gravest crimes just because of their race. So the crimes that were done by the presidents of the United States, they do not take these crimes into account, like the aggression against Iraq, not what they did, well, across the world, actually. They do not look into that, I mean, the ICC, but they keep accusing the Africans. This is not something that I made up. You can look at the data, you can look at the statistics, and you will look at yourself, you will see yourself, and the confirmation to this, that some of the African cases, the ICC refused to look into the colonial history, into the colonial background. They were only considering the starting point of the conflict in not impartially, but they need to look at the root causes. They need to look at the factors that brought this situation to the brink of tragedy. No, they were not interested in this. Why? Because it concerned the interests of those who have always been considering themselves as colonial countries that are supposed to dictate their will to the colonies they have. And the ICC was expanding its geography, even though it was looking only at those countries that the collective West was unhappy with. So it was politically motivated, the choices that they made. But it does not come as a surprise if you look at the people who work at this quasi-instrument. The Secretariat of the ICC has 6 out of 7 directors from the Western countries. So, do you think what kind of music they are going to play? Almost half of the participant countries are not represented there, and they hire people from the countries who are not signatories to this agreement, even including the American citizens. Why is that? Because of the neocolonial practices. And the funding of the ICC is also an interesting topic, because the majority of the payments are being made when the experts are being sent there and investigators are being sent to investigate the cases, and it allows directly interfere with the investigation. So basically, you can use funding to direct the ICC in any direction that you want. So basically, it is being done on the orders of those who are paying. So that's why only 5 new states has become new ICC members, and Burundi in the Philippines withdrew from the ICC, and there are 2 more attempts to leave. And because of this kind of approach to justice, many countries decided to withdraw from the ICC because of the neocolonial practices that is exercising many countries of the Sahel region. Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger, Afghanistan also voiced a similar position. And it's a very important example. It's just one example, but there are a lot of examples like that of quasi-justice, of quasi-law that is being turned into an instrument of the neocolonial practices. Thank you for the attention. Thank you, Madam Zakharova. This is true. Sometimes it's scary to look at these digital, cognitive, and other neocolonial practices of the future. And it is our goal to fight against it. And now it is my pleasure to give the floor to Sergei Pospelov, Secretary of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Collective Security Organization. And please, the floor is yours, Mr. Pospelov. Thank you, colleagues. Thank you for this opportunity to participate in this session. I would like to speak about the parliamentary efforts to ensure sovereignty and security of the countries under modern realities. This year, the Parliamentary Assembly is going to mark only its 20th anniversary, but over these years, we have accumulated a lot of experience of bringing legislations together, national legislations together in the field of security and national security, first of all. And this today is the foundation of how the CSTO countries, CIS and SCO countries, because under this agreement we act together, how they ensure their regional security. During the opening ceremony of this conference, we were speaking about the growing role of parliamentary relations in the field of security, and of course the legislation and ensuring the laws, the sovereign laws, is becoming a priority today, priority for the parliaments of the CSTO states. And due to the political, diplomatic, military, and legal cooperation based on the consensus, because it is important that within the CSTO and other regional organizations, across the greater Eurasia. First of all, I'm speaking about CIS and SCO. We make every decision based on consensus. Our states ensure efficient conditions for the peaceful development and equal integration in greater Eurasia. And here I would like to mention also the Belarusian-Russian initiative on Eurasian Charter of Diversity and Multipolarity. Madam Zakharova has just mentioned the economic pressure as a mean of bad competition and discrimination, and in this regard, it raises an eternal question: what comes first, politics or economy? And today we understand that the international law is collapsing, and against this backdrop, political decisions and military decisions are becoming a way to resolve economic problems. And under these conditions, it is important, like never before, to stand together to protect ourselves from the external aggression, from international terrorism, from drug trafficking, from illegal weapon trafficking, and other manifestations of transborder crime. All those geopolitical instruments that are being used by some countries to become stronger, and other countries are turned into their colonies. And in this regard, it is important to say one more time the agreement that was signed within the SCO, within the CIS, and within the CSTO. And today it's becoming an important factor of standing against neocolonialism in the greater Eurasia. All of this is making an important contribution in the implementation of sustainable goals accomplishment, into the cooperation between SCO and BRICS to preserve sovereignty, historic truth, culture of the peoples, and their best national traditions. Secondly, it is well known that such terms as colonialism and neocolonialism, they are pretty much similar. It means seizing or controlling the territories and receiving profits from this. In case of colonialism, it is being done by military force or terrorist attacks or armed conflicts and interventions. And the legal base of protection from external destructive influence within various parliaments and interparliamentary organization, it allows to create necessary legislation not only to fend off armed attacks, but also to preserve the key infrastructure and also to deal with the consequences of various disasters, man-made or natural. As for the neocolonialism, we are speaking not only about armed aggression, but various sanctions, blockades, financial manipulations, and also information, radical ideological pressure exerted on the population, especially on the younger people. Using these destructive factors, they maintain external control over various resources, natural resources, technological resources, and even electoral resources. But basically, they exert pressure on the will of the people, on the will of the leaders. And in this case, parliamentarians came up with a number of solutions that are efficiently used and exercised in various countries. And these legislations are pretty much similar in various countries. Countering terrorism, first of all, I mean those laws that exist today in the space of CSTO, protection of information, cybersecurity, energy security, the general principles in the field of artificial intelligence and robots in the context of national security, and an entire system of various laws to protect electoral processes and the sovereignty of the CSTO member states. Also, it is important to say that what's today a priority for our organization? We are trying to synchronize legislation in the field of ensuring security. I mean, artificial intelligence legislation, biological security, using the unmanned aerial vehicles, the electoral processes, protection of sovereignty in this regard, and also countering various IT-related incidents. In the arsenal, in our arsenal for the next few years. The CSTO member states are planning some 45 draft laws. And the colonial prosperity model of the unipolar world is based on inequality of the bigger and smaller states, something that Madam Zakharova has just mentioned, seizing the resources, escalation of exploitation of the human resources, and external control of these countries. Every country and every people, they have a sovereign right to choose their own development path. But at the same time, in the conditions of the new technological revolution in science, in economy, in management, in weaponry, we need to make a pragmatic choice in favor of the true freedom, equality, progress that are feasible for all the states only when we have a multipolar world order. Basically, on this choice depends the future of the states, of the peoples, of the space exploration programs, and also the preservation of the identities, of the traditions, of the culture of the various nations depend on this. And in turn, the Parliamentary Assembly and the parliamentarians that are members of this organization, they are ready to cooperate in this field, and we are grateful to people attending this session for the joint effort to come up with legislative approaches to come up with various laws, not only within the CSTO, but also across the greater Eurasia.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And now it is my pleasure to give the microphone to Professor Prasikan Maharaj, Senior Director of Economic Studies Institute of the Jwana Technical University, South African Republic, expert of the Valdai Club. Mr. Maharaj, please.
Now I'd like to give the floor to Alexei Pankovsky, the head of the State Secretariat of the Security Council of the Republic of Belarus. Thank you so much for coming here. The floor is yours. Thank you. Colleagues, it's so nice to be here today, and I would like to thank our Russian partners for the very chance to speak about this difficult topic, but it is important topic. Previous speakers, they said a lot of important things about this, and we share a similar approach, key approach to the things that were already voiced here. We prepared a presentation. We would like to share our experience and our views, how we believe it is possible, what are strategic approaches to counter the neocolonialism within the Union state. It's also a unique entity, the coexistence in this format, in the format of the Union state of such a great world power as Russia and the Republic of Belarus, a relatively small country, post-Soviet country. It is true that for many of us, for the former Soviet republics, recently we thought that neocolonialism or colonialism is something that does not exist anymore in the world of politics. It has become a matter of science fiction or history textbooks, but we see this trend reversed. If you will, there is a reincarnation of this concept, so it's becoming filled with new significance. The Monroe Doctrine was mentioned already, something that was created last century. Now they call it Monroe Doctrine after Donald Trump. We remember Brzezinski and Henry Kissinger. There are people who follow up on these approaches, and some of it makes sense, some of their ideas, but how we can quantify the level of the neocolonialism, how we can measure the aftermath, the outcomes of these policies. How can we judge who's the winner today and who is in a weaker, subdued position? Because these things are also difficult. What are the criteria, considering that it's a multi-dimensional thing of today? So that's why we would like to focus on the approaches that we have today. It has been said already, a lot has been said already about the policies pursued by the Western countries. Maria Zakharova mentioned digital gap, and we can see it in practice as a country that is facing heavy sanctions for a lot of time together with the Russian Federation, and we were facing sanctions even before that, and we can see sanctions imposed on the Union state, and we can see how it is happening. First, the technology is provided, so you're getting addicted to this technology, and then there are some restrictions introduced, and they are creating this digital inequality, this digital gap between the countries, and so we can see it is a new form of neocolonialism in the field of technology, on the field of digital. The continuation of these neocolonial practices, you can see key statements here from the global leaders, and we can also see crisis of international institutions, and we are trying to use the UN or the regional organizations like Shanghai Cooperation Organization or the Collective Security Treaty Organization, the Union State. We are trying to counter these attempts, and we can see that there are a number of the different trends. On the one hand, countries are trying to marginalize, so becoming separated. But on the other hand, we can also see some interdependence when anything that is happening in a smaller country that is far away from your country, it has a reflection, it has an impact on the entire world, and we can see it from the recent conflicts. And Belarus is pursuing an independent policy. It's trying to protect its national interests, so we can feel these neocolonial practices of today in all its glory, so to say. And we are trying to protect ourselves from these kind of threats, and we would like to share our approach. You can see that in our strategic planning documents, it is being enshrined. I mean, the concept of the national security multi-vector policy based on the widely recognized principles of international law, countering the restrictive measures, the preservation of the UN's global role and its Security Council's global role, and consistent deepening of the strategic partnership relations with China, developing relations with the other Asian, Middle Eastern, Latin American countries, and also preservation and maintenance of partnership within the traditional organizations that I've just mentioned. We've already mentioned the initiative that we came up with, that our head of state came up with during the second Minsk Security Conference back in 2024, Eurasian Charter of Multipolarity and Diversity in the 21st Century. And I would like to direct your attention to the fact that this document is also a kind of unique model, a response to counter these processes. It does not formulate any strict borders or limits or imperatives. We are inviting all the countries for this open dialogue so that all together we could build a new security architecture considering all the risks and all the threats that we are witnessing, risks for the strategic stability and progressive development, to facilitate as our heads of state to have a consensus in the field of security. As you know, in Minsk, in the capital of Belarus, we hold this international security conference every year, and a lot of people who are present here, our friends and colleagues, they also attend our conference, and we are grateful to you for supporting our initiatives, for sharing our approaches that we are trying to implement. Unfortunately, this process is a hard one, and with our partners in the CSTO, with the Russian Federation, with our partners from other organizations, we are trying to fulfill these initiatives. And as one of the examples within the Union State, so you can see it here, we are trying to implement all these ideas. We had an expert group, a task force between Russia and Belarus together. We drafted this document. It was already published, so you can read it. And I would like to quote a number of articles from this document. At this slide, you can see the challenges and threats for the security of the Union State against the neocolonial policies. And I will cite attempts to build and to support neocolonial exploitation system that is based on the superiority of the Western capital and artificial limitation for the independent development. So these attempts are failing today. And this document is like an ongoing process because, as I've mentioned in the beginning, to say how much progress we've made here it's a difficult thing to measure, but the previous moderator, as you remember, said that probably we will not see the fruit of our efforts during our lifetimes. But optimist is a well-informed pessimist, so we still hope that during our lifetimes this will happen. So we can see Western activities as a threat, and the hybrid measures to create more focal points of tension. This is stipulated in our document, and we stand for the new security architecture, polycentric world order, and so on. And as we have mentioned before, deepening the integration within the CIS, CSTO, our Eurasian Union, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, we see these instruments as an alternative that already exists. For example, within the SCO, our country, our head of state came up with these initiatives that you can see here: establishment of the indivisible security mechanisms in Eurasia, facilitation of the trade procedures, independent financial mechanisms within the SCO as a response to these restrictive coercive measures, and of course establishment of the transport and logistics infrastructure, considering the barriers that were lifted within the Eurasian Economic Union, also scientific and innovation cooperation, which is very important, and humanitarian dimension, because those values that we are implementing together, it makes us different from the West. It makes us to stand out from the West. And it stops us from pursuing the neocolonial system that the West is trying to establish in its new shape and form. That's why, of course, in conclusion, I would like to say that it is important in this situation to change, well, if you will, to change the mentality, the thought process, so that we could together, using these basic elements, these basic ideas, based on the positive practices, because we are speaking about the neocolonialism here, and we would like to share our experience in countering this effort so that we can make yet another step against it, and we could bring this cooperation to a higher level within our initiative, this multipolarity charter that we've already mentioned. Thank you for attention. We are ready to answer your questions if you have any.
Thank you very much. Thanks to Belarus for the real support with deeds, not words, that you have always provided to Russia to defend the security of the Union state. Thank you for your integration initiatives voiced by the leadership of Belarus. And indeed, you're right, for the last few years, the Minsk conference and other forums taking place in Belarus are becoming important platforms to work out conceptual, strategic, and ideological documents. And we see that Belarus has been implementing them in practice. And in many aspects, what Belarus has been doing is bound to become a good example for us here in Russia. Thank you once again. And now it's my pleasure to give the microphone to Fabian Melnichuk, professor of the Rio Grande do Sul University, Brazil, a Wildlife Club expert.